The year is 1940. Across the narrow, gray expanse of the English Channel, the map of Europe has been rewritten in fire. France has collapsed. The British Expeditionary Force has barely clawed its way off the beaches of Dunkirk, leaving behind the wreckage of a broken army. Britain stands alone, a solitary island fortress against a continent now under the swastika. Adolf Hitler stares across the water, his war machine poised for the final strike. He calls it Operation Sea Lion. The plan is simple: crush the island, secure the coast, and end the war. Every morning, the tide pulls back from the English cliffs, revealing nothing but the cold, churning water between the island and the enemy. There is no buffer left. There is no second line of defense. The German High Command knows that to land their troops on British soil, they must first command the air. They are waiting for the signal. The Luftwaffe gathers in the occupied airfields of France, engines warming in the dawn light. Thousands of tons of steel and high explosives are prepared for the crossing. The island holds its breath. The silence over the Kentish fields is heavy, a fragile calm before the storm. The shadow of the Nazi war machine stretches across the water, but the German command underestimates the island. Along the jagged, wind-swept coastline, a network of steel towers hums with high-voltage electricity. These are the chain home stations, the invisible eyes of the British defense. Inside the darkened bunkers, operators sit hunched over cathode ray tubes. They watch the glass screens, waiting for the jagged green lines to spike. The air in the bunker is thick with the smell of ozone and hot vacuum tubes. A sudden pulse ripples across the display. One blip, then two, then a swarm of them, emerging from the static like ghosts. The operator adjusts the dial, his fingers steady despite the mounting pressure. He tracks the movement, calculating the speed and the heading. The formations are crossing the coast of France, climbing toward the English Channel. He picks up the telephone, his voice cutting through the hum. Multiple contacts, heading northwest, he reports. The information flows instantly to the command center, turning the invisible threat into a precise target. The radar network has stripped away the element of surprise. The German formations are no longer hidden. The island is no longer waiting in the dark. It is watching. The order ripples through the base like a shockwave. A bell rings, sharp and insistent, cutting through the stale air of the ready room. Pilots drop their tea, shove aside benches, and sprint for the doors. Boots hammer against the concrete, a frantic rhythm that echoes across the airfield. They reach the grass, where the fighters wait in rows. Mechanics pull the chocks away as the pilots haul themselves into the cockpits. There is no time for hesitation. A hand flips the ignition switch. The propellers jerk once, twice, then catch. A low cough of exhaust turns into a steady, deafening roar. Blue smoke curls from the pipes, stinging the eyes. The ground vibrates under the weight of the turning engines. One by one, the aircraft taxi onto the runway, their wings trembling in the prop wash. The leader signals, and the first wave surges forward, gaining speed until the wheels leave the turf. They climb, banking hard into the sky, chasing the distant hum of the approaching German formation. The scramble is complete. The sky over the channel became a graveyard of twisted metal. Day after day, the cycle repeated until the pilots were hollowed out by fatigue. They landed with hands shaking so violently they could barely unbuckle their harnesses. Some were barely 19, their faces smeared with oil and soot, eyes wide and bloodshot from hours of staring into the sun. They climbed out of the cockpits, drank lukewarm water, and waited for the next alarm. The airfields took the brunt of the pressure. High explosive bombs tore through the grass, leaving jagged craters that mechanics filled with rubble and dirt, while the next wave of fighters prepared to launch. Hangars stood as skeletal remains, their corrugated roofs shredded by shrapnel. Every hour brought a new wave of German bombers, relentless and precise. The communication lines snapped under the weight of the shelling. Fuel drums ignited in massive rolling fireballs, blackening the horizon. Each sortie pushed them closer to the edge, where the only thing keeping them airborne was the desperate knowledge that nothing stood between the enemy and the island below. The German command made a fatal miscalculation. Frustrated by the stubborn defense of the airfields, they turned their sights toward the heart of London. The sky over the coast cleared as the bomber formations banked inland, leaving the battered airfields behind. A strange, heavy silence settled over the hangars. Pilots crawled out of their cockpits, listening to the sudden absence of the drone that had defined their existence for weeks. In the distance, the horizon toward the city glowed with a deep, unnatural orange. Smoke rose in thick, black pillars, marking the impact of the new campaign. The Blitz had begun. For the first time in months, the ground crews did not have to scramble for cover. They emerged from the rubble, dragging heavy tools and supplies into the open. They filled the craters with fresh earth and leveled the runways. Fuel tankers rolled out, pumping gasoline into the thirsty tanks of the fighters. The radar towers continued their steady hum, scanning the empty sky. Mechanics hammered out dents in metal wings and replaced shattered glass. The RAF used every second of the reprieve to rest, refuel, and reorganize. While the city endured the fire, the defensive network began to breathe again. The radar blips converged. The order to scramble cut through the silence of the airfields. Engines ignited in a synchronized roar, propellers slicing the air into a blur. The fighters climbed, banking toward the coast of Kent to meet the incoming formation head-on. The sky erupted. Machine guns chattered, a rhythmic, mechanical pulse that vibrated through the airframes. Tracer fire streaked through the clouds like glowing needles, stitching lines of fire across the horizon. A German bomber lurched, smoke pouring from its starboard engine, but the formation tightened, returning fire with a wall of lead. Pilots pushed their aircraft to the absolute limit. They banked hard, pulling G-forces that strained every muscle. The sky over the green fields transformed into a chaotic arena of spinning wreckage and desperate high-speed turns. The sky changed. The German bombers arrived, but the sky around them was empty. Their fighter escorts were nowhere to be seen, leaving the heavy machines exposed. The RAF pilots saw the gap instantly. They climbed into the sun, waiting until the last possible second to dive. The attack was surgical. A Spitfire dropped from the glare, its guns hammering into the lead bomber. The target shuddered, its fuselage tearing open. The formation lost its cohesion. Without the protective screen of fighters, the bombers banked and scattered. It was a reversal of roles. The hunters were now the prey. Every time a German bomber went down, it was a loss the Luftwaffe could not replace. Meanwhile, the British pilots stayed in the fight, their fuel gauges dropping but their focus absolute. They picked off the trailing aircraft one by one. The sky was no longer a contested space. It was a graveyard for the invasion force. The tide had shifted. Across the narrow stretch of the channel, the invasion fleet sat motionless in French ports. Barges and transport ships remained tied to the docks, their decks empty of troops. The fuel tanks were full, but the orders to sail never came. In the German command centers, the maps remained static. The reports from the front were undeniable. The Luftwaffe had failed to clear the skies, and without air cover, the ships were nothing more than floating targets. The High Command reviewed the casualty lists. The loss of pilots and aircraft had reached a point where the offensive capability was shattered. There was no path forward. The order was transmitted through the lines. Operation Sea Lion was indefinitely postponed. The massive concentration of men and machinery began to disperse. The threat of an immediate landing on British soil dissolved. For the first time since the war began, the German war machine had been brought to a complete, forced halt. The ships stayed in port. The engines cooled. The radio crackled to life in homes across the island. Winston Churchill spoke, his voice steady and resonant, reaching into every corner of the country. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The words hung in the air, marking the end of the long, desperate struggle. The pilots who had fought in the clouds were now on the ground, their hands shaking as they unbuckled their harnesses. They stepped onto the grass of the airfields, the smell of burnt oil and cooling metal clinging to them. The sky above was empty. No engines droned. No smoke trails scarred the blue. The radar towers stood silent against the horizon, their work finished for the day. Along the jagged coastline, the tide pulled back from the rocks. The sound of the water, the only thing left in the air. The sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the fields that had been the arena of the battle. The island had held. The invasion had failed. For the first time in years, the people looked up at the sky and saw only the clouds. The war would continue, but the course had shifted. The machinery of the Nazi advance had been stopped by the grit of the men in the cockpits. As the last light faded, the silence settled over the coast, deep and absolute. The battle was over. The island remained,